Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. This is Pastor Joe of St. Jacobus Lutheran Church in Woodside, here at Bethany Lutheran Church in Elmhurst, the home of Stacy's Pantry. As I spend most of my time doing, I'm currently waiting for a truck. We're also coming up to the end of the Book of Acts. Today is Friday, the 26th, and we're going to read chapter 27. And then tomorrow, we're going to finish the Book of Acts with a quick reflection on the Acts of the Church today. Now, it's chapter 27 focuses on Paul's journey to Rome. Paul has had 3 or 4 hearings or trials before the Jewish councils and the Roman authorities in and around Jerusalem. But now, after they have all been unable to figure out what to do with him, Paul is heading to Rome. So during each of these trials, Paul has had a chance to defend the faith. Paul has had a chance to speak the gospel, to pronounce Christ, who was born, lived, healed, taught, was betrayed, put on trial, died, and was resurrected and ascended into heaven. Paul is able to tell his own personal faith story, this profound conversion experience where God calls out to him, where Jesus calls him to action, to change everything he's ever known. Paul goes from Saul, the Pharisee and persecutor of the church, sent with tremendous authority to find people who follow the way, or the Nazarenes, or the Christians, these early church communities, and shut them down, arresting them and dragging them to Jerusalem that they could stand trial for blasphemy and for disobeying the law and all these other things. Paul has this conversion experience, and he becomes the great missionary of the church, reaching out to the Gentiles, being a voice for inclusion, a voice for acceptance, a witness to the power of the Holy Spirit, active in the cities and places that him and Barnabas and James and Mark and Peter and all these people have gone to. The last 5 or 6 chapters of Acts all focuses on Paul's trials, but they serve to remind us that Peter and even Lydia and all the people in these first church communities, they also dealt with persecutions, with trials, with the contempt of their neighbors, with anger, with people trying to shut them down or stop their ministry and their work, with people doubting and confronting and disbelieving them. These experiences that Paul goes through serve as one example of many of the trials and persecutions and struggles that the early church went through. Chapter 27 focuses on a sort of ocean adventure with storms and shipwrecks and all kinds of challenges, which, again, much like Paul's trials, this serves as a reminder that throughout Acts we hear people went to this city and that place and over to here and up to there. Each one of those was a very dangerous, risky journey, whether it was storms or trouble from enemies or pirates or people who wanted to attack you or robbers or whatever else you might endure. We sort of go through the book of Acts and feel like, they went here and they went there, like they hopped on an airplane or jumped in a car. It was not, none of these were easy journeys. So this is Acts chapter 27 from the New Revised Standard Version, and this is right after King Agrippa and Festus fulfill Paul's request and send him for a trial in Rome before the emperor. As a Roman citizen, he's entitled to that. They seem more than content to just let him go. But he's made this request and they can't deny it. So this is Acts 27. When it was decided that we were to sail for Rome, they transferred Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. Embarking on a ship of Arethubium that was about to set sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and allowed him to go to his friends to be cared for. Putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. After we had sailed across the sea, that is, off Sicilia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship bound for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Sindus, and as the winds were against us, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salomon. Sailing past it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. Since much time has been lost and sailing was now dangerous, because even the fast had already gone by, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I can see that the journey will be danger and much heavy loss, not only of cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. Since the harbor was not suitable for spending the winter, the majority was in favor of putting out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, where they could spend the winter. It was a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest. When a moderate south wind began to blow, they thought they could achieve their purpose, so they weighed anchor and began to sail past Crete, close to the shore. But soon a violent wind, called the nor'easter, rushed down from Crete. Since the ship was caught and could not be turned head-on into the wind, we gave way to it and were driven. By running under the lee of a small island called Claudia, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After hoisting it up, they took measures to undergird the ships. Then, fearing that they would run on Sithis, they lowered the sea anchor, and so were driven. We were being pounded by the storm so violently that on the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. And on the third day, with their own hands, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest raged, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been withholding food for a long time, Paul then stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me, and not have set sail from Crete, and thereby avoided this danger and loss. I urge you now to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For last night there stood by me an angel of the God to whom I belong, and whom I worship. And God said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before the emperor, and indeed, God has granted safety to all those who are sailing with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we will have to run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, as we were drifting across the Sea of Adria, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took soundings and went and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they took soundings again and found 15 fathoms. Fearing that we might run off the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. But when the sailors tried to escape from the ship and had lowered the boat into the sea, on the pretext of putting out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the boat and set it adrift. Just before daybreak, Paul urged all of them to take some food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you have been in suspense and remaining without food, having eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will help you survive. For none of you will lose a hair from your heads.' After he had said this, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then all of them were encouraged and took food for themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. After they had satisfied their hunger, they lightened the ship by throwing the wheat into the sea. In the morning, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with the beach on it that they planned to run the ship ashore if they could. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea. At the same time, they loosened the ropes that tied the steering oars. Then, hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the ship aground. The bow struck and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, so that none might swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest to follow, some on planks and on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. The word of the Lord. So this is another one of these remarkable stories in the book of Acts where nothing will stop one of God's messengers from sharing the gospel. In this case, it's a massive storm and powerful waves and sea that just stop this boat from getting where it needs to go. The crew takes drastic action after drastic action, not eating, throwing all of the cargo, the money, the stuff that they were getting paid to transport overboard, cutting off anchors, doing these drastic acts to try to save maybe the ship, but most importantly, their own lives and the lives of the people entrusted to them to get to their destination. Now, things get even more crazy when Paul shares this vision from God, this word that all will be safe if they follow him, this prediction that the cargo will be lost, the boat itself will be destroyed, but all of the people, the lives, will be saved. Now, Paul increases the drasticness of what they're being told to do. He has them throw away the lifeboats that could have saved people. In the midst of this storm and this chaos, he stops for a dinner break, blessing bread and sharing it with the people on the boat, all 276 of them. Paul does these actions telling them to run the boat aground, I guess there was no other way to stop it. And all while this is happening, we have to bear in mind that these are not steamships. These are not motorized boats. These are not using fuel. People are rowing and doing all this really hard work, moving sails and trying to figure out what they can do as their lives flash before their eyes and they realize this is the end for them. Throughout this journey, we see Paul remaining faithful to God, remaining faithful to the God who's gotten him through everything so far, remaining faithful to the God that's got so many of the other disciples and followers safely through where they were going. Paul continues to trust the Spirit that has given him the words, the wisdom, the opportunity to announce Jesus. And throughout this trip, we can imagine the people on this boat. Paul starts as this mystery prisoner. Like the Roman authorities, they have no idea what to really make of him. But they know they're going to be in deep trouble if he doesn't make it to Rome. So they're honestly just not sure what to think of him. Some of them may be believers. Some of them are not. Some of them might be curious. I can imagine Paul spent a good deal of time talking to people, teaching, preaching, proclaiming Christ. What else would he do? That's what he's done throughout the entire book of Acts. And we see that Paul's trust in the Spirit is right. Paul's trust in God's word, God's communication with him, comes to bear. And the ship does get destroyed, but everybody safely makes it. We see At the heart of this story, this trust in God's power. And we also see this reminder that what they do throughout this book was not easy. Going from one city or place to another could always end like this. All of these journeys and these trips could easily have been stopped by human-made disasters or by natural disasters. Any one of these conspiracies to kill Paul could have come to happen. But they don't, because Paul is, in chapter 28, going to finally get to Rome and preach Christ to the emperor and tell his story and share the faith that he's been entrusted with. So I invite everybody to come back tomorrow for our last day on the book of Acts. So thank you again for tuning in, and stay safe.